All right, Courtney. Terry, are you ready to rock and roll? Or do you have any opening words of wisdom, Courtney? Oh, wait a minute, Courtney.
You gave me is, pretty interesting. A lot of different things from people that are not uncommon. So I suspect even those that didn't send in a photo might recognize some of what we've got online tonight.
Yep, one of our little mealies.
Yeah, there seems to be hard to get rid of, although I've had less trouble with them here in Florida than I did in North Carolina, probably because the greenhouse is open more, and I have a lot of lizards.
Yeah.
You want to?
Go to the next one.
Okay, I was going to zoom in on our little critter there.
Oh yeah, that's a fantastic shot. Most of the time I can't see them that well. I need my little magnifying glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one's really interesting because of the question, the wrinkled leaves, and one of the things that I guess everyone that grows fowls knows is they need pretty constant moisture, but good drainage. And with the aliflora, these puffed clay pellets, you got good drainage, but you don't really have any ability to hold moisture. And the other thing that is super important here in Florida, if you use city water or groundwater, we've got so many minerals in it that even the aliflora will build up salt residues. So those beautiful new roots coming out, when they hit one of those pieces of clay that's loaded with salt on the surface, that root will just stop growing. So the issue that they have to deal with is how to get moisture. I have seen people grow fowls in aliflora and do it fairly well, but they were doing it hydroponically. So they had water just pretty much running through the pot for a good 8 hours a day. You can grow fowls in lava rock because it holds a lot of moisture as long as you don't have a lot of minerals in your water. So that's basically all they have to do with that. Sounds like they're using appropriate fertilizers. They just have to have a way to keep their roots moist.
What do you think about putting sphagnum on top of the pot?
Well, that'll probably help, but still they're going to have the issue with the bottom of it just not staying damp. I guess it depends on how much sphagnum they put and how moist they keep it. But the sphagnum would certainly keep the surface moist, and that'll help the roots get started.
Yeah.
Once the roots get down, as long as the salts aren't building up, you can grow in this. Like I said, I've seen people grow hydroponically in this with just a drip around the pot for 8 hours a day with little pumps.
The other thing is there's not too many, this is fowl season and there's not too many fowls in bloom. So I wondered how they were giving them that fall temperature change to induce spiking.
Well, I don't know, mine are all in full flower right now, but I noticed, we've had a lot of cool nights this last couple of weeks, and I noticed some of mine are actually starting to throw spikes again. I'm gonna have to cut them off. Art's asking how to reduce the salt residue. Well, the best way to do it is not to have water with salt in it, but that's not always an option. But what you can do is after you water, just go ahead and rinse everything. Just have some RO water or rainwater set aside and just run that through the pot. That'll soak a good bit of the salts away.
And Carolyn, you asked about would you have to water daily? With the problem with growing indoors is if you're growing in a temperature or a humidity controlled environment, that low humidity is just going to dry everything out. Very good. It's going to be very hard to keep things moist enough. So that indoor growers have to figure out a way to increase humidity locally around the plants.
Yeah, that's right. The humidity inside is probably 25 to 30%. And it's pretty hard to keep those pebbles moist unless you have a mist just dripping over them. And that's pretty hard inside.
Yeah.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
I don't grow inside. I'm growing all out in my little courtyard outside. So I've got some with those wrinkled leaves, like on the picture here, that first plant. So do I just need to water more often, I guess is my question.
Yeah, you could. In fact, if they're outside, and these are just newly repotted plants, you can do what Sue suggested and just put sphagnum on the surface, keep it moist until the roots start getting down in the pot. And the beauty of these kinds of pots is you can see the roots. So what will happen pretty quickly is the roots will run along the top, hit the side, and go straight down. Once you get a number of roots in there, then it's just going to be a matter of flushing to get any salts that build up.
And Carolyn, the other thing you have to ask yourself is if you're growing with organic media, is the mix still fresh enough, or are the roots getting smothered by a mix that's breaking down?
That's right. And one of the things that I still do is I grow in a very porous mix. I grow my phals in a very porous mix, and I have a surface layer of Pro Mix. And about every 4 or 5 months, I just take that plant and I just really run a lot of water through the Pro Mix, which mostly then washes through. And then if I've got a lot of roots down in the pot, I just don't worry about it for a while. And then I'll put another layer of Pro Mix on the top when I'm ready to get them going again.
And that
The Pro Mix is really great for having a lot of nutrients. It holds moisture pretty well, but it really runs away. I mean, it just kind of runs out of steam after 6 months or so.
And that Pro Mix is basically the mix that we sell for Phalaenopsis. That mix is a mix of Pro Mix and sponge rock.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mix it with sponge rock. I just use it right out of, I use the Pro Mix HP, so it's got a lot of porosity, but sponge rock would just be pretty easy. The only problem is you really want a pretty, good layer there to hold that moisture until the roots get down.
If anybody was interested in doing it that way, we can provide the straight Pro Mix without the sponge rock.
Yeah. Yeah, I have grown phals actually for many years in straight Pro Mix. And the only problem I ever had with it is they grow too fast and you have to repot every year. And you know how I am about repotting.
All righty, Terry. This was one of our friends that sends questions in, sent these pictures in. This is on the left is before she repotted it, and on the right was after she repotted it. And
this is actually a pretty common scenario. I think whenever a neighbor brings me a plant, it's almost always a Phalaenopsis, and it almost always looks like this. And the story usually is it was given as a gift. They've had it on the windowsill for 3 years, and if it blooms, it isn't blooming well, but they wonder what to do with all these roots that are running amok. And basically, the general theme is that the media has just disintegrated, and the plant is just sending out roots, doing what orchids do, looking for moisture and an attachment. And so what you have to do in this case is simply lift it out of the pot, which is what it looks like they did. And usually in a plant like this, when you look at the oldest section of the stem, you'll see that it's all brown or black. Usually you can almost just pull it off with your fingers. You don't even have to use a tool. The difficulty for most people is what to do with all of those roots. So you really have two options. If you're trying to keep it in a pot, what I typically do is I prune the roots about 4 inches from the plant. I know it hurts to do that after you spent so much time getting them, but you've got to get the plant back in a pot if you want it to grow in a pot. And I drop it down into my pot and put peanuts or whatever you use as your bottom drainage, and then add a medium. And if you're growing inside, you probably need a little coarser medium than I use. It looks like what they put after repotting is a pretty coarse.
Way too coarse.
What is it?
I said way too coarse. That bark is way too big.
But I will tell you, you can grow fine in that if you grow it like a Vanda and water it every morning.
Yeah.
But that's the problem. Most of the time, you really can't do that. And they do like to have some roots that are in a moist environment all the time, even if they do send these aerial roots out. So basically, they needed maybe a deeper pot, it looks like. And I'm betting that they didn't put that stem all the way down to the bottom of the pot before they started adding the medium. But they need to pop it out, put it to the bottom of a pot, and if that pot's too short, then they need a taller pot and get it going again. You can see it's lost some of its leaves, and that's just because it doesn't have enough root mass to get water.
I told you to cut below that bottom aerial root, drop it into an empty pot, put some peanuts in there, get some root stimulator, get the roots starting to branch, and then a handful of mix every week as the roots start to branch and grow until it gets reestablished.
Yeah, that's the trick, getting some new roots to start. And if you drop it into a pot where it's got basically something around the stem that holds some moisture, doesn't seem like it, but just having it down in a pot will allow that to happen. Once the roots start coming, then you can add the medium. You can add it slowly, or if the stem is nice and hard and dry, you could put it all there at once it starts showing some root growth.
Yeah. All right, Terry.
Well, someone's growing actually this Cattleya pretty darn well. What it looks like is that this is a bark, probably the stuff from, I don't know, maybe it's fir bark, but it's a coarse bark, which is probably breaking down. And the older part of the plant, I mean, I guess the statement is that's the old part. And what do? Well, basically, if that bark is all disintegrated, then you need to pull the plant out and replace the bark with another medium. But if the bark isn't all run down and it looks like the plant's still nicely in the pot, then you really don't need to do anything. If you're not sure about it, and what you could do is simply lift the plant out carefully, just wet it, lift the plant out, and if the bark starts falling off and there's not a lot of live roots in there, then you know you've got to put more medium. If it's got a lot of nice healthy roots down in that pot, just shake some of the older bark off and drop it back in, even if it doesn't have a lot of media.
That bark looks old and tired to me.
It does to me too, but it could just be the top.
Yeah.
So I would take a good look, but usually if the top is all like that, the bottom is going to be really soggy and needs to be replaced.
I think the other thing I see when I look at that picture is I see where a lot of Cattleyas grow sort of longitudinally along a line. Others seem to grow in a radial fashion in a circle, and this is the kind that looks to me like it's growing around radially over and on top of itself.
Yeah, those are hard to deal with. I've been repotting and had a few like that. You'll get generally more linear growth if light is coming from one direction almost all the time. When you have light coming from different directions at different times of the day, you'll see more of this. And also, as a plant gets larger, you tend not to have as much of an issue. But there's nothing wrong in terms of the plant crossing over itself as long as you're okay.
No, just as an observation.
Yeah.
All right, Terry.
Someone's growing that well.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, there's two things one sees there. One, this looks like the slow release fertilizer. I get those little beads.
Yeah.
And it depends on if it's the kind of fertilizer that is used in potted plants. One of the things that I learned years ago is even though it might say for 6 months, most of the fertilizer comes out in the first 4 or 5 weeks. And if you want to break down a bark fertilizer, that's the way you do it. You add a lot of fertilizer, keep the things moist, and that bark will go bad fast. And that bark is certainly past its prime. You've got some molds and who knows what else is all there.
Yeah, that snow mold will basically it'll get onto the roots and smother them. And
yeah, if that is snow mold, I can't quite tell from here. I can see filaments there. But if it is snow mold, it's also hydrophobic. So you can be watering like crazy and the bark will be just dry underneath because that snow mold just does that. It's hydrophobic.
time to repot.
Yep. This one was interesting. It's a dendrobium. I think that's what they said.
Yeah, I think it's that Gatton sunray.
Yeah, and you know, when you see buds like this, there are a lot of things it could be. If it's outside this time of year, it's normal. We're normally in a pretty humid state, but we've had such low humidity lately. I've seen a lot of things that I normally only see in March or maybe April happening now because it's just so so dry and the sun's so bright. So it almost looks like those buds just dried up. Maybe they got too much sun, if the plant's not getting enough water. But there's also some nice looking buds there. So the plant isn't ready to give up on that inflorescence. It just isn't able to supply what those buds needed.
And I would be very suspicious of the evil thrips.
That's a good point, Sue. Thrips make buds look like that. I don't see any on there,
No.
but I never see them anyway. They're pretty small.
Yeah. Next.
The invisible insect. I'm kind of guessing that that was probably a roach at night.
Or a mouse.
Could be a mouse, but you know, usually when well, it depends on how strong that stem is. But when a mouse crawls up a stem, a lot of times you'll notice in the morning it's kind of bent over. But roaches don't have that issue, and I've seen them eat a whole flower in a night.
And then the buds too.
Oh yeah, they especially like a brand new flower just opening. That seems to be their favorite, but they'll also eat bud after bud on a stem if they're really hungry. I don't see any slime trails,
No.
but one of the things that people misunderstand, as you see a slug and you think it's not very fast. I've seen slugs move 4 or 5 feet in 5 minutes. They can really haul when they turn the lights on. They know you're after them.
Yeah. Next.
Well, that plant is having an issue. And the question is, what has happened to it? For instance, I've seen plants like this that were doing pretty well, and they're put out in more light, more heat, and not getting enough water. And so the roots are just basically dying in there because of just drought. And that could be it. It could be that the roots are dying from a disease. And in fact, that's why you've got the shriveled leaves and so forth. The bulbs are all shriveled up in this case. But whatever the underlying issue, it's water. The question is, why is it water? So the first thing one would do is to see how firm that plant is in the pot. If it's really tight in there, you might just turn the pot upside down, just wash some of that surface medium off and see if the roots look alive. If the roots are alive, then it's just a matter of culture, just getting it more water, maybe a little shade till it gets going again. The other possibility is perhaps it was repotted at the wrong time. So it was repotted right after it got new roots. You cut all the new roots off, and the plant just doesn't have any new roots. It won't until the next time during the season it's ready to grow new roots. I see some bifoliate growths on that, and that's usually an issue for bifoliates. It's repotting at the wrong time. I think Art asked if this could be saved. And the answer is yes. If it's got a root system and it doesn't have any sort of infection in the rhizome, you really can't see that from here. Terry, can you get closer to the rhizome there?
I've got a picture of the purple ring on the bottom of that slide, just in case.
Oh yeah.
In case
Yeah.
we take a check for fusarium to one way or the other, because that wilt, the wilt that's in the pseudobulbs, the wilt that's in the leaves, obviously it's not being hydrated. If it's not a root problem, it's very possible that that fusarium has set in, and what fusarium does is blocks the uptake of water through the vascular tissue.
Yep, and that's a good photograph, Sue, because you can see the roots aren't very healthy on that cross section either.
That cross section happens to be from one of my plants, so from a couple of years ago. But that's the diagnostic to find out if you do have fusarium is cut through the rhizome and see if you have that purple ring. That'll tell you if you've got fusarium in the plant. It's probably just toss it.
Lisa wants to know, what's fusarium?
It's a fungus. Fusarium is a fungus that grows and blocks the vascular tissue. It blocks the tubes that carry water from the roots up to the upper part of the plant.
And it's fairly slow growing. So if you've got it in a plant and you see the back the back leaves starting to do this, but the front ones look okay. You can work along the rhizome until you get to a point where you don't see that little circle. And you can often save the first 3 or 4 bulbs.
If you use a sterilized tool with every cut.
Right, absolutely.
And so, you know, that would be interesting to just go to the back of that plant and cut through that rhizome and see what you see.
Yeah, and then that's that picture on the right. That's the same plant, Sue.
Yes.
And the other thing that I see is that pot is really got a lot of salts on the outside. And it's also possible that what's just happened is the salt has gotten so dense in the medium that the roots have just stopped growing. You could have lost your roots from just too much salt.
I think the statement was made that the plant has never looked particularly good, though.
Well, that sounds like fusarium.
Yeah. I think it's worth checking.
Certainly, especially if it's a valuable plant.
Yep. That's a Schomburgia.
Yeah, there's so many answers to this question. The first one is when you get certain kinds of hybrids that combine different characteristics, often the plant grows faster than it really should. And so that's what this could be. But I would almost guarantee that the biggest part of this is that the plant is getting a lot of nutrients when it's nice and warm, and it is genetically predisposed to grow very fast. And when it does, it can have these weak spots, and they can actually break off. I mean, they can get so long that the weight of the leaves just breaks the pseudobulb. And what you have to do is, in terms of this growth, is make sure you support that growth so that it doesn't break. Let it harden. There's some plants that I've had that always do this. No matter what my nutrient regimen, even when I'm not giving them nutrients, they will do it. And once, though, if I could keep it stable and it would harden, then it would be fine. But I'm guessing that this is a mixture of all of those things. Yeah. Now, the other piece of this puzzle is the kind of nutrients it's getting. If it's getting plenty of nitrogen, but not the other things like calcium and magnesium and all the micros, then you tend to get a lot of growth, but the cells are not forming hard cell walls. And so it won't hold itself up even later on, because once those cell walls form, you really don't get a lot of extra things being added to the cell wall. It'll be weak for a long time. And that also becomes real susceptible to fungus and bacterial infections.
All right, next one.
Yeah, this one is really interesting because I've seen that a lot of times on Brassavola digbyana. I guess it's Rinculalia digbyana and Glauca. They tend to get reddish colored leaves in bright light, but they'll also get reddish colored leaves if they're not getting a lot of water. The coloration just essentially blocks the sun from penetrating far in the leaf and demanding water. So the plant will protect itself by producing these pigments. But the roots look reasonably healthy. I see some new roots coming there. And you know, the thing about a plant like this is when they're in growth mode, you can water them every day as long as the medium drains really well. So they do great mounted, for instance. In a pot, you have to be a little more careful. I can see where some of the roots have died in this one, but I also see some nice roots coming. So essentially, I would just pot this plant up, keep it a little shady until those roots get down and can supply the leaves with enough water to handle the bright sun. An awful lot of us tend to think of the Rinculalias as liking a lot of sun, and they do like a lot. Well, they'll tolerate a lot of sun, but particularly when they're smaller, it's better to keep them under a little bit lower light so they don't have this happen to them.
Yeah, I mean, the normal coloration for the digbyana is that white starchy coloration that acts like a sunscreen.
Yep.
I remember you telling me a long time ago, Courtney, that red is a sign of stress.
That's right.
And if you see red, you have to figure out what is causing the stress in
Yep.
the plant. and it can be a disease, it can be sun, it can be water, it can be just about anything. But red is a sign of stress.
Yeah, and this time of year, it really isn't uncommon for even in my greenhouse, the sun is changing angles, and I've actually seen a couple of plants that look like they're getting burned, even though they haven't before. But the way the sun is coming into the greenhouse now is just different and hitting them at a different angle.
He said
So
discoloration was throughout the winter and then into the spring. So this has been this color for months now.
yeah, and it's probably not going to change back. It's probably, kind of like a really good tan that you don't have to ever worry about getting again. But my bet is that once this gets going, you'll see more of those silvery gray leaves than the reddish leaves.
Right, next. So it's sort of hard to see in this picture, but that looks to me like some sort of bacterial blighting on the leaf.
Yeah, that's sort of my take too. But the other thing it could be is something taking a bite and then moving on and leaving the leaf a little exposed so bacteria can get in there. When bacteria get on leaves, a lot of times the question is, did the bacteria cause the damage or are they secondary?
Yeah.
And if a leaf is really weak, if it doesn't have good strong cell walls, then bacteria can get in there and cause damage. But typically it's some insect doing that first.
So would you recommend just going prophylactically with the peroxide after the fact to protect the leaf?
Yeah, I mean, that would be if what I would do is just keep an eye on the spots and go ahead and put the hydrogen peroxide on there and just, note one spot and keep an eye on it. Make sure it's not growing. Most of the time, something like that is going to just dry up. I mean, it's just going to be unsightly, but it won't spread. If it does spread, then you got to take the leaf off. But if it spreads, that's another sign that the plant just has too much nutrient in the cells, and it's just a rich place for bacteria to grow.
There's a question in the chat room.
I actually got that online from someone today. There are two ways to do it. There's the way that I do it, which I just take the bottle and pour it on because I'm too lazy to get a little spray bottle. But you can also just put it in a spray bottle. You can buy them at Ace Hardware, the little sprayers, and just spray it on the leaves. It makes a nice thin layer, and it goes a lot longer than just pouring it on out of the bottle like I do. The difficulty of hydrogen peroxide is once you open it, it starts to lose its potency. So for me, I just go ahead and use the bottle and then get another one. It's pretty inexpensive. Although, most of the time it's not a big deal, and I can usually find another plant to apply it to.
And if in doubt, just buy a fresh bottle on the first of every month, replenish your hydrogen peroxide.
Yeah, the issue with leaving it in the sprayers, although some of those sprayers can seal pretty well. So if you get one where you can seal, where you can twist the end and you can't spray anymore, that actually will hold the hydrogen peroxide and keep it pretty good as long as you keep it out of the light. You can't let it sit in the light. That's why they have brown bottles.
Next.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with this plant. It just isn't ready to bloom yet. It's not the time of year. Nothing seems to be happening. I don't know what this particular plant is, but there are two scenarios that are going to unfold. One is this is a sheath, the bloom that holds the blooming buds. And in plants that are just reaching maturity, a lot of times they'll get a sheath, but it'll be a dry sheath. They won't bloom out of it. But also there are some Cattleya's that after they get a plant with a sheath or growth with a sheath, they'll put out another growth, and this sheath will turn brown, but the new growth will also have a sheath, and come spring, usually spring, they'll bloom out of both the old dry sheath and the new green sheath. So if you have a dry sheath, don't cut it off unless it starts to turn black or brown or looks like it's getting rot, because they will sometimes bloom out of that dry sheath. Some of the the plants that are in the background of major unifoliate cattleyas tend to do that.
Yeah, the only time you would really open up that sheath is if it got that sickly yellow or black where you were worried about water condensing inside the sheath and rotting the emerging bud.
That's right. And usually when you see that sheath start to get the yellow streaks and so forth, it's usually happened because the buds that were going to emerge have started to rot. And at that point in time, you can't probably save it. And there's a question there about a double sheath. Let's see, Cattleya labiata has two sheaths. There's an outer one just like this one, and then the inner one is about a third the size. They have two sheaths. And so you can typically see that sheath inside if you get the light just right. So if the outer sheath starts to turn colors, you can pretty easily peel that brown or the black sheath, whatever the outer one is, and just carefully pull it away. And if the inner sheath is green, you're golden. The buds will be in there, and that's nice and safe. But what I would do when you peel the outer sheath off, put a little of that hydrogen peroxide around the wound where you've taken it off so you don't get rot starting there. Because if you've got rot starting in the beginning, which is why you take the outer sheath off, then there might be a need to put a little something there. Cinnamon down there would work just as well too.
Okay, next.
Well, I can't quite see. That looks like spider mite to me, Sue.
I think that's what we concluded, that it was spider mites.
Yeah, the way to test it, and it's not a foolproof method, but if the spider mites are healthy and alive, and you take a little piece of white paper, just pure white, and you kind of rub it across the spider mites, you'll see little streaks of red, and that's just basically the inner juices from the spider mites. You have to have good eyes to really see the spider mites. Even under a microscope, they're still tiny. But when you see something like this that look like little webs, that's almost always a spider mite. They're hard to get rid of once you get them, but a lot of the oils will do it. And usually we don't see spider mites here in Florida except during the wintertime, because spider mites don't do well in high humidity. So when the humidity is high, you don't see a lot of them, but this winter has been kind of extraordinary on the low humidity side.
And that yellow, that silvering on the bottom leaves, particularly on dendrobiums, is just characteristic of spider mite damage.
Yeah, and they really do. Spider mites really do love certain dendrobiums. They like phalaenopsis. They like the ones that have a little softer leaves.
All right, next. I guess we should talk about treating them. So basically, I think a lot of isopropyl alcohol on the underside of the leaf, giving it a bath on a weekly basis, and then washing the bottom of the leaf with alcohol to treat for the mites.
Yeah, and I mean, that neem oil also works real well. If you've used neem oil, then if you coat the bottom of those leaves, it's pretty effective on spider mites. But you have to be real careful with the soft leaves and neem oil. It can damage the leaf too. So I've got neem oil, but I don't use it on spider mites just because I'm not careful enough and pay enough attention.
All right, next.
This one's sort of been interesting because I mean, that plant looks like a pretty healthy Cattleya nobilar, and the fact that those new growths are dying is a little perplexing. I couldn't quite tell how healthy the roots are. If the roots are healthy, then I'm not sure exactly what's happening to that, other than some organic cause, cold maybe, or something along those lines. Any ideas, Sue?
Well, as the story unfolded, this plant is being grown in a basement, sort of kind of under lights in the winter months, and then moved outside in the summer months. So I think this is a case of just trying to keep the plant alive in the wintertime until it can be returned to a more favorable growing environment, those roots look to me like they're dead. They don't look like they're supporting the plant at all. So I think probably the way it's being grown in the summertime when it's outside and getting rained on is probably okay, but maybe not so much in a basement under lights, under a light.
Yeah, when I saw those new growths rotted like that, my first thought was they're staying wet and cold. And if that was happening in the basement and they weren't drying out, that's a very good explanation. This particular species, Cattleya noblar, likes bright light, likes lots of air movement. They love to be mounted. For all practical purposes in the wintertime, mine just sit in pots with almost no media and don't get much water at all. The bulbs all dry up and look shriveled, but boy, as soon as spring comes, they just explode.
My first thought when she sent this picture in was that she had cut it up at the wrong time, because, and Terry, go to the full screen, because I wanted to mention the, if you look at the bottom there, it says Rogerson's. If you go to our culture by genus page, there's a table that summarizes when different Cattleya species make new roots. And particularly for the bifoliates and some of the species orchids, it's very important to repot at the proper time. And this table will give you information about some form new roots when they're forming the new, when the new growth is forming. Some will only throw out new roots after that new growth matures. So just seeing the beginning of new growth is not enough to tell you that it's time for you to repot that Cattleya. But
yeah, and Nobilar and Walkeriana, they're both real similar in their growth, and you hit it right on. So when they are getting new growths is when they put out new roots, and they will do it almost 12 months of the year here in Florida. But I suspect that if the plant's staying pretty cool in the wintertime, it's not going to do that. And that's kind of critical when it comes to repotting, is to have new roots started. Now, I will also say that I've taken Walkeriana back bulbs that had no roots whatsoever, dropped them into the bottom of a clay pot, forgot about them, and the next thing I know, the plant's climbing out of the pot with roots everywhere. The trick is to get the plant dry, so that those rots are going to go away and you won't have that, because otherwise, if you don't get some new growths, you're not going to get new roots. You've got to get new growths. And it may be important to note for anybody who doesn't know, we usually think that the new growths come out just as they are here at the very base of the pseudobulb, but they also have live meristems that are up the bulb some, almost all the way to the top. So even if you don't see any live eyes down at the base, they will often grow from where you see the little subdivisions on the bulbs. You'll often get another growth that'll come out there if there are no live eyes at the base.
okay, next.
This looked like sunburn to me, Sue.
I think all the way, sunburn all the way. You can see the way on the highest points of the leaf is what is most affected. I think on old blue eyes there, it's just beginning to be bleached. But Abbott and Costello probably have seen too much sun, and on Abbott there where the tissue was black, that's very
yeah. And I'm looking at the pot and I'm seeing sphagnum that looks really dry too. So there's a combination that will cause leaves to go like this, even when the sun isn't as intense as you think it needs to be to burn them. If the plant is not getting water, then the leaf heats up more than it would otherwise. So there's sort of a balance you've got to find. But my guess is these got moved outside or into the sun too quickly, not acclimated enough, and that's not an uncommon thing to have happen. Just repotting my plants and moving them around the greenhouse, I've had a couple look like they are burned just because they were exposed to more light and I didn't realize it.
I think the Captain Hook looks just fine. I don't see.
Yeah, it's a little yellow, But my take on Captain Hook is that it probably just needs to get out and get light, but slowly acclimate it. The leaves look a little dark, so I'd be kind of careful as you introduce it to more light, but it's ready to go. Got good roots all over the place there.
Yep. Next. So I'm seeing a little bit of rot here.
Yeah, I'm seeing maybe there was some damage to the leaf. It could have been from cold earlier in the year. I mean, it could be sunburned, but whatever it is, it looks to me like there's some rot in there. The fact that it's not growing real fast, otherwise that leaf would be gone unless this just started. It might be a fungal rot, but you can't be sure with that color. So the real treatment for that is to cut it off.
Yes, I think, Lisa, I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, cut it off and treat the everywhere where you cut with cinnamon.
The Dolly Parton, I don't think that's, I think that's more of a peroxide issue.
Yeah,
I
yeah, that looks like just a little damage from something. And I think it was the same sort of thing that we talked about earlier. Put peroxide on there and it probably should stop it. And if you put peroxide on there and it doesn't quite stop it, put some peroxide, put some cinnamon right on top of it, wherever those little spots are. And that should take care of it. Just let it dry.
Let's go to the whole screen again, because I think there's also something interesting is that we've got a whole bunch of different potting mixes that we're trying to grow similar kinds of plants in. I mean, sphagnum over here, this sphagnum and Dolly looks pretty old. I'm not sure what Sunny and Sunny is potted in.
It looks like sphagnum.
But old sphagnum.
Yeah, old sphagnum, and that is always an issue. They so many of those beautiful phalaenopsis that we see at the big box stores and even at shows are grown in sphagnum, because phals can be grown extraordinarily well in sphagnum. If it's good sphagnum and the plants haven't been in there long, they can stay in there for a while as long as you're not over fertilizing. But once that medium starts to go, you need to get them in something else. And if you've got multiple plants, then you really need to have a way to make sure they're equally watered.
So I mean, this is where that ACE repotting clinic, we would have said, just come see us over at ACE. We'll get you all set up, get everything situated in a new pot with fresh mix. So Lisa, you may just have to come on over to the house.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there was a question there about using alcohol and I guess hydrogen peroxide. And the hydrogen peroxide I use just comes right out of the bottle, just like you'd put on your own wound. It's a low concentration, but it's really effective at killing bacteria and fungi. Generally, I just put it on and leave it. That's what I typically do. A fowl with crown rot, for instance, I'll pour a half a bottle of hydrogen peroxide right in the crown and just let it sit and let it dry out. And then if the plant can be saved, the rot will stop. And after a little while, you'll start seeing some new growth and you can start watering it again. The alcohol, I rarely use alcohol. I tend to like the hydrogen peroxide better. The advantage of alcohol is that it evaporates pretty fast and dries fast.
And it desiccates scale and mealybugs and damages mites. So it's more the alcohol that you use for a pest problem, where the peroxide you use for a bacterial problem.
Right.
At least I do.
No, I don't really have many problems with insects anymore. But that is a very effective way, particularly if you have a small collection.
Okay, next. I mean, I think here is this, you can see again the various potting mixes that are being used to grow plants, and it's very difficult to learn how to water your plants if you have to look at each plant, what it's potted in, and is it dried yet, or is it time for me to, should I wait?
Well, the other facet too, Sue, is that you have plants that have different needs relative to water. So I'm not sure what Peter Pan is, but it looks like maybe it's a Oncidium of some kind. And that compared to Phalaenopsis, for instance, they have different water needs, different amounts of moisture around their roots are preferred. So that's the other issue. Now, there's nothing wrong with using different media. For instance, using a more dense media for a phal and a more porous medium for a cattleya, if you're going to water at the same time, so that one will stay more moist while the other is allowed to dry out because of the medium.
Right.
The medium allows you to adjust things, but you just have to remember the needs of the plant. Some orchids just need to dry out, and others like to be, they like air movement around their roots, but they still like some moisture.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, if you're going to water once or twice a week, then you just have to adjust. Your phals are going to be a little bit more water retentive, your Oncidium a little bit less water retentive, and that way you can water all your plants at the same time, and it takes out some of the guesswork.
And it also will depend on the size of the pot.
Yep.
A bigger pot holds more moisture. So essentially what you do with a cattleya, as the plant gets into a bigger pot, the medium becomes coarser. And there was a question there about clay or plastic pots. The nice part about clay pots is they breathe, so you get moisture, being pulled out from the sides. The downside is clay pots will retain salts. They're more expensive, and because the moisture leaves, they need to be watered more frequently. So it's got a lot to do with your time to water, what kind of water you have, and really a preference. I like clay pots to the extent that I can. I've learned from experience that hanging clay pots up can be dangerous in a greenhouse. So plastic pots are definitely safer if they tend to fall on you. So there are a lot of ins and outs for hanging, but if you don't have time to water a lot, plastic is the way to go. Now, I will tell you a trick that I use for Phalaenopsis, because the conditions in my greenhouse vary so much during the winter and the summer. The thing I don't want in the wintertime is my Phalaenopsis staying too moist. So I started growing a lot of my phals in these mesh pots. We got some examples coming up here. And then in the wintertime, basically they're just sitting there in the mesh pots. In the summertime, I take the mesh pot and I drop it in a clay pot. So it holds more moisture and allows me to grow in the same place and still keep my watering regimen the same. But there are a lot of tricks like that you can employ once you've figured out how to grow each kind of orchid.
Courtney, you've got some people fascinated with your statement about that you don't have a problem with pests anymore.
Well, the distance, the pesticide, the hormonal pesticide that I know you use too, Sue. Ever since I started using that, my scale issue is basically has disappeared. I don't have any scale. I use that. I want to say it's a kind of boric acid. You and I both use it. I can't think of the name of it, Sue. It comes in like
it's that orthoboric acid.
Orthoboric acid. I saw some roach damage on new roots about a month ago, and it's frustrating because I've been waiting to repot that plant when it got new roots, and I guess so was the roach. But I spread that just through that boric. It comes just a little fine grains. I put that all over my greenhouse, and I haven't seen any roach damage since. I try to remember to do that in sort of right as the winter ends and I'm starting to water more. I just forgot this year. You usually remember when a good bud gets eaten or something.
And Leslie, I think I've drenched and I've sprayed with distance.
Yeah, and Leslie, the big nurseries and some of the botanical gardens, which is where I learned to use distance, they use it as a drench, which sounded really expensive when I found out how much distance cost. But they basically told me they went from spraying, almost constantly to spraying once a year. or drenching once a year, and they thought that was well worth the money. The first time I used it as a drench because I just couldn't seem to get rid of my scale. Now I just spray one time a year, 1 teaspoon per gallon. And even though it's really expensive, my pint has lasted me about 15 years, and I've given it to different people too. So it's very cost effective and especially saves time and energy.
Next.
Sue, I also should mention I have an army of lizards.
I was wondering when you were going to talk about your lizards.
They actually are amazing. They're attracted to buds and new growths because they lick the sweet material that comes out of the new growth and the buds. That trick is designed to attract ants to protect new growths in the nature. But apparently the green lizards we have, the Carolina knolls, are very happy to lick it all up. And so they're on the ends of leaves and buds and so forth. And they do a pretty good job of eating individual little bugs that come along, even ants.
And that's one of the reasons why Courtney doesn't like to spray. He doesn't like to disrupt the ecosystem that he's got going on in his greenhouse.
Yeah, the lizards have to watch out for the snakes.
Yeah.
But they keep a balance.
Yeah. So what do you think's going on with Opie?
Opie's got problems. Basically, well, it shows two things. One is that plant, the rhizomes and the bulbs look pretty dead. I'm not sure about the roots. They look pretty white. I can't tell if they're alive or not. But you can see down in the pot, there are a couple of live leaves. There's a new growth coming out. There's an old growth there, and if you look at the very base of that old growth, some of it's green, some of it's black, and that suggests that there's a rot in the rhizome.
Yep.
And can it be saved? I mean, often people ask me this question, and frankly, if this is my plant, I'm going to throw it away because it's too much trouble to save. On the other hand, I've got one I'm trying to save right now because it's a really rare plant. And so what you can do, if you do have something like this, and you want to save it, sometimes it's worth just doing, just to learn, how to save a plant that's really impacted on something that you're not going to cry too much over if you lose it. What I do is I would take and cut off all of the dead material. Every place there's black, I would cut it off. And just as we did with that other plant, cut the rhizome. And if the rhizome is black, you keep cutting until there's no black. At that point in time, what I would do is I take whatever fungicide I use or you use, and I would make up a weak solution in a bucket, and then I would soak. In fact, I do this. I would soak that plant for 25 or 30 minutes in that weak fungicide, and then I just take it out and stick it in a pot and see what happens. 9 out of 10 times, you can save the plant if the rot has not gotten into the rhizome where the new growths are coming out of, like this one. But again, it's got to be worth doing because that plant is going to be years from flowering. It's almost like having a new seed germinate. It just takes a long time for a plant to recover when it's gone through something like that.
And then the whole screen. I think Satchmo.
Satchmo looks, that's an oncidium of some sort. And one of the things about Oncidianae, and I'm sure this one right here, is that they have fairly fine roots. And the roots dry out fairly fast. They absolutely love to grow in baskets. The only issue is if they aren't well established in a basket and they're hanging outside, this time of year particularly, they can really dry out.
Yeah, I think this is, Lisa, is this one that we repotted at Ace? It looks like our handiwork with all the bamboo stakes.
Yes, it is. Uh-huh.
So I think that this probably is a water issue, just as Courtney says. And maybe what we should have done is drop some sphagnum or something, or some Pro-Mix or something on the top of that for there to be a little bit more moisture. But it doesn't look like it's getting enough water.
Yeah, that would be my take. And if this has just recently been repotted, then that is almost certainly the issue. And it's in a basket. It looks like it drains really fast. So what you really need to do is get it moisture. And if it doesn't have roots, it's going to be hard to get it going out in the bright sun. So drop it into more shade so it's not losing water as fast as it is out in the open. And then just watch your water balance. Water it and then come back at the end of the day and see if that basket is still moist. Just stick your finger down in there.
I think that's in that coarse mix. So that's in a very freely
Yeah.
graded mix.
It looks like you could almost water this twice a day
Yeah,
and it not be too wet.
particularly during this period of the low humidity. And I mean, come May and June, and when we start getting into the tropical storm season, it'll be
Yeah.
a different story. But for this time of year, probably just way too dry.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the time of year where I actually water in the evening before I go to bed, like 6 to 8 o'clock. And then I get up in the morning and I water again because it's so hard to get anything wet with this humidity. There's so much air moving through greenhouses and even outside. The wind has been strong. And just watering in the morning, an hour later, everything was so dry that the plants didn't have time to take up moisture. So this time when the humidity is below 40%, I water in the evenings and then again in the morning. And that constitutes one watering for me.
Next. Well, Courtney,
I think those are bird droppings.
I would have just said straight old poop.
Yeah. Yeah, the little white cast there is sort of a dead giveaway. That usually comes with bird feces. Now, the one thing about this is great fertilizer. The only issue is you might have all kinds of seeds sprouting up in your pot.
Yeah, it looks like millet there, doesn't it?
That's what it looks like. But that, I would just kind of, it'll dry up. I would just flake it off. The only thing that bad that can happen is if your plant stays real moist, you could get a rot starting under there. But these leaves look pretty good and hard.
They look
Looks like they're getting good nutrients.
Yeah, they look fabulous. Next. Here's your mesh pots.
Yeah, I will tell you, I love growing in these things. I grow all my seedlings out in Hawaii right now, and any of my seedlings that are encyclias or that need extra drainage, I'm potting in pots just like this. And one of the things I've actually appreciated, I mentioned my phals that I'll put in the clay pots in the summertime. When I've been getting these and they've got beautiful root systems like this, I've just been dropping them in clay pots and they've just exploded. In months, they're growing as much as I think they would if I tried to repot them into a solid clay pot and disturb the roots.
I think you can see where these were in a clay pots because look how the roots are growing wrapped around the outside of the net pot.
Yeah, they're usually in trays,
Yeah.
plastic trays. So when they pull them out, you can see the roots that were wrapped in the little slot for the pot.
I mean, Bill's question was, can he just drop this into a larger pot and then backfill around the outside of the mesh pot? I wouldn't do that because you don't know what kind of shape the material is in the pot, and you're going to have two different rates of degradation inside and outside the pot. They're perfectly happy just being just the way they are.
Well, what I've discovered, Sue, is that those roots on the outside of that pot, they will die.
Yeah.
Because they've been used to being enclosed. And what I've done so far, and it's working real well now, it's been, I guess, a year since I started. I take that pot and I don't just put it in a bigger pot that barely slides in. I put it in a pot where it's got like an inch all the way around inside, and I don't put anything else in there.
Right.
The only thing I'll put in there is maybe a little piece of peanut to keep it from jiggling the inside pot from the outside pot. And within a year, the plant has literally filled all that open space with roots. Yeah. Now, come eventually, I'm going to have to deal with the issue of the plant growing in a medium that may be rotting. And if it's in Orchiata, the Orchiata will last pretty well if it's good Orchiata. But at some point in time, hopefully the plant will be so big that you'll have to break the clay pot to get it out. but you just have to, it'll depend a little bit on what kind of plant it is.
Yeah. All right, next.
I think you and I were talking about the upper left
Yep.
leaf the other day, and I think we decided it's some sort of a fungal infection. And it looks like when you look at the leaf like this, it looks like that fungal infection is on the outside of the leaf. But if you get the right angle, you can see it's actually inside the leaf. And this kind of thing often happens when the stomata, which are the part of the plant that releases, that opens and lets carbon dioxide in, oxygen out, on the bottom has essentially, for some reason, gets infected. There are some Cattleyas, and there's a certain lineage of Cattleya that will almost always develop this in real moist greenhouses. The plant grows and flowers extraordinarily well, but they always have these unsightly leaves. Now, you can prevent it if you basically are willing to just spray fungicide frequently enough on the plant. You can keep that from happening. But I really believe it's a fungus that's coming from the underside and grows up towards the light. So you're seeing it in the tissue that it's damaged, but it's underneath a thin layer of cells on that leaf.
We should also say that this plant was tested, because when you see black necrotic spotting like that, the first thought that comes to your mind is the potential for it to be Cymbidium mosaic virus.
That's right. And I've tested so many of these plants that I don't even think about that anymore. Usually when I find a plant, and usually this is a plant that I'm looking to buy, and the dark parts are like streaky, where there's like lines, that's the sign that typically it's the Cymbidium mosaic virus, but not always. All the plants that have tested positive for Cymbidium mosaic for me lately have had beautiful leaves.
So, you think it's basically a genetic predisposition on this plant then?
It is, but it isn't always. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can happen to a stomate that can basically allow it to be open and be invaded. A really moist greenhouse, cold in the wintertime, where it stays moist and cool, that allows fungi to get up through the stomates. The stomates have a hard time when they're in cold conditions and high humidity. The real trick to stopping it is just having tremendous air movement.
And what about this? What about the sclerotic striping?
Yeah, it's really an interesting one.
I looked at my greenhouse today and I found some plants with this sclerotic striping too.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that can cause something like this. It can be genetic. I mean, I've seen that happen on a growth, and then the next growth has it, and the next growth has it, but another lead on the same plant won't have it. And you can cut it off. Some people think these are valuable, but my take on this one is that's not what it is. And the leaf on the right, I guess it's the right part of a bifoliate, maybe. I can't quite tell if there's two.
I think it is.
Yeah, you see the brownish coloration there. That suggests to me that there's a cause, something like bacteria or fungi. Again, this could be nutritional too. It could be not getting some nutrients it needs. Magnesium, for instance, is really important for chlorophyll. So it's altogether possible that it's the chlorophyll inside that plant that aren't developing properly. And I can't tell. The old leaves look like they're normal. The ones in the back, I just can't quite see.
The leaves look to me like they're still producing. I wouldn't cut them.
No, I wouldn't either. I would let them, I would sit there and wait and see what happens. I'd give them a little more magnesium. I don't know what kind of fertilizer regimen is being used on these, but I'd just watch them for a little bit, maybe make sure they're getting their micronutrients. But no, they still look healthy. Even those little brown areas don't look like they're spreading rapidly.
Okay, next.
Ah, Myrmecophila. This is what they look like in the wild. um, yeah, that plant can be saved, the one on the left. It's hard to tell sometimes if the bulbs are really dead or they're just really yellowed. I typically have one or two of these growing out in full sun in the summertime, and the bulbs will get absolutely solid yellow orange. And when I put them in the greenhouse, when it finally gets cold, I can see they're still alive. They're still got, you know, healthy roots. But this has also got some new growths, and it looks like a dead growth there too, or one or two, just based on how they're all shriveled up.
I think he said that the growths, the older growths were hollow, you know, the way Schomburgkias get.
Yeah.
Because that's the back of the same plant.
Yeah, they're supposed to be hollow.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I actually observed one day when I was just looking at one of mine, and I just happened to be looking at it at the moment that it opened up, and it just sort of splits from bottom to top, and this fluid runs out, and it's perfectly hollow. After a little while, the Schomburgkia that I have growing outside get full of ants. These big, I call them wood ants, but they've got another name too. But they're big, ferocious ants. And my inflorescences that are, you know, 5 or 6 foot high with buds on them, the end of every bud is one of those ants, just protecting the bud. And so it's sort of a beautiful relationship. The plant provides a house for the ants. It also provides nutrition by producing sugar on the buds and the tips of the new growths. And the ants provide protection. And I know from people who've collected these that the guys who climb the trees to get them, they hate to collect Schomburgkias or these Myrmecophilas because of the ants. They're always full of ants.
So I think the bottom line is you just cut away all that old, if it's old and hollow, cut it away and get that plant resituated. Art made the comment that the plant that this person that he got this plant from had very high iron in the water.
Yeah.
And I've had problems with, I've gotten plants from people that have had high iron. That iron just coats the roots, and it's very hard to make it go away.
Yeah, and it looks like it's being grown in lava rock too. And that's also an issue. Lava rock holds tremendous amounts of water. And so because of that, it holds a tremendous amount of salt. And so the salt buildup on that lava rock can be huge. And so what I suggest they do is just get it out of the lava rock. If there's any obviously dead bulbs, just cut those off. And frankly, I like growing these in those plastic baskets with nothing in it. Just drop it to the bottom, cut all the dead roots off, drop it to the bottom of that plastic basket, tie it tight, and just water the devil out of it. They almost can't be killed if you don't have them in a pot that's holding moisture. Just give them lots of water and they'll explode with roots.
And Lisa says she's got an ant nest in one of their plants. I think that if you ever are going to bring that inside, you're going to have to get rid of the ants before you bring it inside. So
it's hanging in the tree outside right now, and just hearing the conversation made me think that we shouldn't be chasing away the ants tomorrow.
Yeah, the only time I have trouble with ants, and I still do, even though, you know, I don't like bringing them in. I don't have trouble with these big ants that get into the Myrmecophila. They don't seem to be an issue for me. What I have trouble with are the little fire ants that'll get in some of the pots that have real fine medium, and I don't realize that there are ants there until about, you know, halfway through pulling it out of the pot and realize I'm getting stung like crazy. Right. They're little small red ants. What I would suggest if you got that, just use some of that orthophosphate. No, is that right?
I think 7.
Seven works wonders. Just the powder will take care of it. But the little pellets too, the stuff that I was talking about before.
Orthoboric acid.
Orthoboric acid. That also, ants don't like that as well. Art Russell says 409. I've never tried 409.
All righty, next. I think you can really see the iron on this picture.
You can, and you know, the Schomburgkia, and these are actually now called Lalias. And one of the things about iron, it's very unsightly. And it can coat a root to the extent that the root dies. But surprisingly, I've had some that looked like they had a lot of iron on them, and I cut the root thinking it's dead, and the root inside is perfectly live. My plants of this type that come outside in the summertime and get lots and lots of light, once the rains start, hopefully we'll get some eventually. Once the rain starts, it will flush a lot of the salts that are soluble out of that pot. And you know, the beauty of these for me is I don't ever repot these. I just wait for them to grow out of the pot and cut off 3 or 4 bulbs and stick them in another pot because they grow so fast. The medium never has chance to go bad. In this case, it's not going to because it's rock. But this is the way they love to grow. And while it looks like that's got some iron on it, that yellow color is just kind of a normal thing for them when they're outside in plenty of light.
I hate looking at that mix and seeing it's just salt encrusted to me.
Yep, plenty of salt there. And you can get rid of some of the salts that are soluble, but you can't get rid of all of it. Not all of those salts are soluble. So it's time to get that plant out of that pot. There's just a lot of salt in there.
Next. Oh, this was just an interesting story. When you're really afraid what you're going to have to do to your plant. I got an email last year with one word, and all it said was help, because this had been in bloom. This is a Laelia purpurata that had been in bloom a month earlier, and it had 50 flowers on it. It was gorgeous. So I said, well, I'm not sure what's going on, but bring it on over and we'll do something. So Terry, go to the next slide. I mean, clearly it was a case of major surgery was required.
Yeah, and there are a number of things going on there. There's some rots that have started, but they don't look like the kind of bacterial rots that are going to kill the plant. It looks like something happened. There was maybe damage from an insect, or sometimes even a dead flower sitting on a leaf that stays moist can get a rot started. And what you have to be careful of on a plant like this is where you see that blackness on the leaf where it contacts the bulb, is if you get a rot that starts working its way in the bulb, you've got to cut most of that off. But if it just gets dry, like some of this looks like it's already gotten dry, essentially it's unsightly, but it's not going to kill the plant.
Well, you'll wait till we see what we did to that plant, Courtney. Because when Terry goes to the next slide, we carved and carved and carved. There was Rhizoctonia in there. There was, we carved until we could find some healthy pieces.
Yeah.
And then we hit it with rooting hormone and we got it situated in the new home. We ended up sending those samples off to the lab in Gainesville, and they said it was anthracnose. It was diagnosed as anthracnose.
Mm-hmm. That's what it does look like.
Yeah. Well, I've always think of anthracnose as being on the leaf tip and working its way down. This was above the leaf axil, which was really strange. I mean, it's.
Well, anytime it has an access point, so a roach bit it, you know, and it got in there, it got moist. But yeah, I spent 2 hours repotting one pot a couple weeks ago. The same thing. I had such a convoluted plant. It didn't have the disease issue, but just untangling everything. In fact, that piece of I just gave you, that was the plant. Ended up with 10 divisions.
Roberta just sent me a picture of the plant today, though. So on the next screen.
Okay.
So
there you go.
You can't be afraid to cut when you have a fungus, or if you have something that's invading the tissue. You can't be afraid to cut it away, because once it's in the tissue, it's pretty much beyond the reach of most fungicides. That's right, unless you're going to do something, use an extraordinary product with, you know, to save it. It's $400 for a quart. Oh yeah, yeah, and this is, I mean, that's a good example of what one can do. It's a beautiful plant. It's growing well, and I can't imagine what it's going to look like next year, because it's clearly put out a lot of new growths and everything. Yeah. So So I think that's our last slide. I think we're still trying to figure out what we're going to be doing in June. Go to the next slide. It looks like we're going to be going virtual for the meeting night on the 2nd. I just don't think that we're ready to be able to start holding meetings again as much as we'd like to. We do have the annual repotting party planned for at Terry and my house at the end of June. If that's going to be possible, that'll be great. Otherwise, I guess we'll schedule another short clinic. I really can't wait till we can meet again. The meetings are, I want to laugh and talk. I ogle plants. I want to bring plants home, but I think until such time as we know what we're going to be doing, we're going to be in this virtual world. And if anybody has any thoughts about a little short program that you'd be interested in, give us a holler. Let us know. We'll see if we can put it together.
Yeah, and the one thing about this, and Sue and I were talking about this the other day, is that it actually has allowed us to have contact with people that, we don't get to see at meetings, who live far away or can't come to every meeting. And that's kind of been nice too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can see if we get those catasetums to start blooming, we could have Fred Clark zoom in for a 5 or 10 minute judging. He could pick which catasetum is the prettiest and give a little short chat on catasetums. I can see a lot of different things we could do with Zoom that we can't do in our normal meeting situation, but nothing's the same as when you get together in person.
No, there's no flying on the virtual meetings either.
Yeah. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it.